Thank you for joining us for our fifth webinar. The subject this afternoon is Bright Futures. How can tools be used to create blueprints for modern schooling? Once again, I'm honored to be your host, Darren Phillips. A big welcome to everyone joining us from around Australia. It's been exciting to bring you this webinar series. It's proven to be extremely popular. We've been facilitating the teacher voice as they ask questions and deepening and share with educators and experts from around the world. And today I'm joined by two dynamic Australian teacher leaders, Michael Parker from Mornington Secondary College and beautiful Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, and Janelle McGann from Wesley College in Perth, who are both doing some amazing work at their schools that they'll share with you this afternoon. Just before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you've tuned into our previous webinars, we really encourage you, the audience, to participate and ask questions of our participants. If you'd like to do so, just type in your questions or your comments into the chat window in the questions section, and you'll be prompted to log in. Once you've completed your details, you'll be asked to register for the event. All you have to do is please press the Yes Register button, and don't worry, you won't be redirected to another page. So let's kick off to Bright Futures. And to kick it off, I'm going to show you a picture. And you should be making the appropriate sounds of that. It's, oh, he's so cute, isn't he? I mean, this little boy is so ready for school. He is the epitome of Bright Futures. Yeah, he's cute and my son. So part of being host is I get to do these things. But I wanted to show you something important about Bright Futures, is that this little guy is so excited for school. He had a lunchbox. He wanted a backpack. Why? Because he knows nothing about school yet. Now, I can tell you, I have a couple more of these little critters, and that "ah" sound that we make when they're so little turns into "oh, Dad, do I have to go to school? Dad, school is so dumb," by the time they hit middle school. And we can argue the toss about the mainstream of data, but my real worry is that my middle schooler might be right. You know, here's the curious thing, however, particularly in innovative Australian schools. This focus on Australian curriculum has provided a catalyst to make changes to get our kids ready for this century. And we know that it's not good enough anymore just to be a master of content. We know in this century we desire so much more for our students. And we have to bear in mind, even if we think of my little guys and their jobs in the future, I'm going to take this little slide from Bernard Saltz, the Australian economist, that the things we know is that the jobs that don't have names yet will fit into some broad categories. But there are some things in this that we know for certain, that our kids, when they move into these jobs, will have to be great problem solvers. They will have to be critical thinkers. They will have to be amazing collaborators. And creativity is essential. And it's really heartening that the question around the world from educators is not should we be getting kids to be prepared for this bright future, but it's how. And let's be upfront about the challenge of this. The status quo, changing that, is not easy. In fact, these problems, they're not just difficult. They actually turn out to be in the wicked realm. And if you haven't seen this slide, we'll be happy to share it with you. And one of the great things in my job is I get to travel around the world and work with schools and their implementation of tools. And I get to see how schools are using technology to design the future, and they're tackling this challenge. And with that, I'm hoping that this is a perfect introduction to my two guests who have been on the journey preparing students for a bright future, and they're here to talk about it. So first off, I want to introduce properly Michael Parker, who's been a teacher at Mornington Secondary College since 1992. And throughout that time, he's held various roles throughout the school, including ICT leadership, sub-school leader, and curriculum leader. He's currently the assistant principal in charge of curriculum and ICT. Mike, how are you this morning? Or it's actually afternoon for you. And
it is afternoon. I'm quite good.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. And our second guest is Janelle McGann. Janelle is the Director of Teaching and Learning at Wesley College in Perth, where her role includes strategic leadership and teaching and learning. And Janelle is a self-confessed PD junkie, fascinated by how brain research is giving educators science for good practice. Good afternoon, Janelle. How are you?
Thanks.
Great. Mike, if it's okay with you, I'm going to kick off our conversation with you this
Sure.
afternoon. You've seen my little few slides there about Bright Futures. Um, how are you preparing your students for Bright Futures, and what's the journey that you've been going through at Mornington Secondary?
Okay, well, for us, I probably want to rewind it a little bit in terms of probably take a view for a sort of 5 or 6 years. We, with the introduction of Australian curriculum, for us, it gave us an opportunity to really look and think carefully about what we were doing. Carefully, because some of my colleagues might be online listening to this. I would have said that our curriculum delivery, what we were trying to get across to kids, right, keeping the how we were trying to do it over to the side for a moment, wasn't fantastic. It was fairly disjointed and a lot of inconsistencies and running through it. And so at that time, we just tripped over understanding by design, and so we did quite a lot of work. Well, I personally did quite a lot of work with that, and then brought that in as a project for the school, looking at really thinking deeply about what it is that we're trying to get across. And a lot of people have seen, if we're talking to Australian educators, you've seen the Australian curriculum, it's a massive document, and in the end, I don't think anybody's ever designed that with a view that every single thing in that needs to be covered. And it's a case of us having that wrestle with teachers about, well, what is it that's actually important for our kids living in our place? What are the things that they actually need, now, and will need driving them forward in the future? And so, I wouldn't have said that it's been a painless journey. I think we've had, some degrees of pain and suffering as people, we ask them to give up things that have been in their list of, well, this is an essential thing for, for forever, and actually saying, well, why is this thing important? Why is it that kids actually need this? And when they struggle with the actual rationale, that actually prompts us to then say, well, let's think about what kids actually do need. And so, in terms of Bright Futures, for us, it's about driving the teaching and learning piece through, starting with, really, as Jay would say, a viable, relevant curriculum, right, and using that as the basis for then saying, okay, well, if these are the fantastic things that are really important for kids to know, how do we then move that forward and actually, know that kids know, and design learning activities which are actually going to be engaging, kids want to actually be part of and participate in.
Can I just, for our audience that's out there, Mike, I know you, and you're very humble, and you're maybe a little concerned about those in the audience that are actually. Can you just do a little bragging for us on what you've actually been able to accomplish over the 5 years? Just give the audience, for someone who's never met you, just tell them you're a little bit that you went through. I know the story, but they don't necessarily know it. So you've kind of jumped to a little bit of what you've done, and which I'll ask you about next. But
yeah, sure.
Give them a little bit of background of where you were and where you are.
Yep, sure. So, like, if you walked into the school 6 years ago, then you would go classroom to classroom, people teaching the same subject notionally, but doing completely different assessments, completely different topics. Real inconsistency. We had once an issue with twins that were in different classes that got completely different reports for the same subject, and we probably had staff that was, I don't want to say reluctant, but was probably not engaging with the dialogue about, it was very much what happens in my classroom is my business, and, you should just all keep out of my way. And for us, the Understand by Design gave us a common language, if you like, around curriculum and around, big ideas and essential understandings and that sort of stuff, which then meant that rather than us all talking cross purposes, we actually sit down with staff and say, well, let's think about what the big ideas are for science or for maths or for art, and actually have some of those dialogues within faculties, but also across faculties, which can always be an interesting element of that. In terms of structurally sitting in behind it, we started with UBD and we were using word templates, and that of course was causing enormous grief because the first bit of any new curriculum is, I think teachers often have that view of, if we just wait for long enough, this will go away and we won't have to worry about it. And for us, it was about really getting people to engage with what the Australian curriculum was actually was on about. And we were finding that a really difficult part to get over because, people go, they find the documents, they've got to wade through them, find the bits. And when I was actually doing my lead trainer training for UBD with Jay, I met you, Darren, and you had this great new planning tool. And for me, it was the answer to the bit of the problem that we had, which is actually giving people an easy way to engage with quite a complex process. And so, things like being able to click into the planner and simply pull out, particular standards and things, has really been that kind of stepping stone to allow teachers to engage easily with the documents. But then over and beyond that, it's about then having a consistent platform that everybody's using. We're not losing Word documents and things floating around the school. We've got a platform that we're using that, I as a school leader can come in and have a look over people's shoulder, give them help and support, but then teachers can collaborate also within the tool to actually build and design units together. So that part of it, like the bright tools to help for bright futures, that the planning tool has been if you like, a thing that's springboarded us forward in terms of that development. Now I would say, I'm going to be careful for people want to come and visit. It's not perfect, right? But we're well and truly on a journey, and you can see, often in schools you kind of can struggle to see, well, exactly how we're going to get to this next point. I can clearly see how we're using, Understand by Design and the tool to really drive that curriculum piece forward and get us into a really good place with that.
Yeah. So again, a little bragging rights for you. Where are you now? Where have you gone? I mean, I know you've from the time and where you are. What would you say? Because you talked about when someone walked in 5 years ago. What would you say?
So, like for example, at the moment we've got consistent learning tasks across pretty much every subject in the school. When I say to people, what are your goals for this unit? Then they don't look at me like I've got two heads. They actually go like, oh, we're kind of trying to achieve this. But I think the other part of it is it's probably changed the way we go about thinking and planning within the school too. When we started this journey, and Jay's quite challenging with this. UBD is not just about how you plan your classes. You should be saying, well, what's the goal of everything we're doing? When we started that, I'd walk into a curriculum planning meeting or a leadership meeting and say, oh, okay, that's all great, but what are we trying? What's the goal? And people would look at me like, I had two heads again, right? But these days, like I've just come out of a whole school planning meeting today, and right up front, the conversations around the table are, what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? And for me, all other things aside, that has been the thing which has really made a difference to the way the school is functioning. As a school of places, even teachers that have only been here for, say, 3, 4, 5 years can't believe it when we tell stories about what it used to be. Yeah. And for me, that's the thing, that the place is completely unrecognisable to how it was, say, 6 years ago.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm going to come back. I know you actually alluded to a little bit of the how in there, and I appreciate that because I think that's what our audience is interested in. But thank you for sharing that, because I'm just going to switch to Janelle if that's okay.
Yep.
And I'm going to open it up a little bit with the question, because we've heard a little bit from Mike about a UBD journey, about where he's been going and using some smart tools in that process to get where he is now. Can you give us a little bit about what's happening, where your journey is currently at Westlake? Because it's a slightly different place. So I'll let you tell the story of what's happening at Westlake.
I guess our journey was slightly different to Mike's in terms of where the school was at, although we've had some similar pathways in terms of the what of the journey and how we went about it, in terms of both processes and tools, because both of us were working with Jay, I guess. So UBD has very much been a part of that journey. We're a school in a green, leafy suburb with quite a reputation for innovation. So we weren't coming, so we didn't have a direct need in the way that Mike had a direct need. And one of the things that I've realised over the journey is, with any change, is what's the need you have if you're going to implement something. So the need for us came, we had been for about 15 years probably on a journey of establishing a learning platform and being really clear about what our learning principles were at the school. We'd done things like a thinking scope and sequence, and we'd focused on really what we could learn from cognitive science in terms of influencing our teaching. So we were establishing that broad pedagogical background. As part of that, we have in our middle school, we changed the timetabling around to have quite flexible timetabling, quite agile spaces. And one of the things we needed for that was, bless you, Darren, that was a Wookiee Shazam one. So apart from Darren's sneeze, or I'm not sure it was a sneeze or a snigger, but on that journey then, as part of the middle school journey, our middle school teachers were really looking for a different way of planning for what we had in terms of a personalised project line. And they went to Hawker Brownlow conference and did Jay's workshop and came back with that. So that began that journey, and we took that from, well, if we're going to use that for our project planning, then why wouldn't we use that for our curriculum planning right across the school? So that was then in our middle school, and then what created the need really in the senior school from that, other than the fact that the middle school teachers loved the process. We had an electronic tool for doing it, so all the efficiencies associated with having an electronic tool for doing that. Really then got our heads of learning area thinking about that as well. And then with the Australian curriculum, we really needed a tool for planning and what I would call weeding curriculum and what Mazzano calls creating a viable curriculum. So not just the, cutting and pasting standards, but really thinking deeply about what does that curriculum mean and what are the desired results you want for that curriculum, and therefore what's most important in your planning. So that really gave us a need for a tool for doing that, and hence the UBD journey. So we've been on that journey in the senior school for about the same time, probably as Mike's been on the journey. That then also drew in our junior school staff as they planned their big inquiry projects as well. So we had lots of different starting points and lots of different flexibilities with using that, and we've customised that to suit really to suit our needs. So that's been one of the good things about is having a tool that allows you a process of thinking, and like Mike was talking about, is a process for thinking both in terms of the planning we do as teachers, but also planning at management and leadership levels. That led us into, when you talk about bright futures, that led us into rethinking our strategic plan as well. So up until that stage, we'd had a pretty the standard strategic plan with words in it that 125 other schools around the country would have similar words in, stick it up on a wall, and basically was a management plan. So we challenged ourselves about what would that mean if we thought about it, and we called it a strategic refresh. So we really took those goals, if you like, and really pulled them apart and thought deeply about them in a futures way. And we went through a whole process with our whole community and members of our whole community to that notion of future-proofing, I guess. And so what are those, for want of a better word, we're in the 21st century, so I don't quite like that 21st century skills word, but for want of a better word, 21st century skills, and how are we explicit about that? And not only how are we explicit about that, but how do we measure it? How would we know? How would we have evidence of that? And how would we be able to track that over time? So I'm where that's taken us now is in terms of what are those big impacts. So we have 4 big impacts, and we're now using that tool linking both that planning tool to then what a learning board, if you like, in terms of being able to gather evidence of all those really important things and how we might aggregate and re-aggregate that data so that students can use that to self-reflect and to look at their broader picture of their education rather than just their marks or their waste results or their NAPLAN results. So that's taken us on a whole new journey in terms of looking at what's really important to us in terms of future-proofing them from general cognitive skills and dispositions. So that's the journey that we're on now, is how do we have students and teachers use that data and gather evidence of that so that students are in a position to be self-directive and self-reflective about where they're going, about their learning and how they might get there.
So I'm going to ask a question that's going to pop up here, and it has already, and maybe Mike can actually help out as well, because I'm sure he's going to want to ask the question, well, what's a learning board? And
I am.
So I'll let you ask it there, Mike, and what your, because obviously Janelle's done some of the similar things that you've done, so.
Yep. It's interesting, from a strategic point of view at the school here, we're really looking at driving or looking at feedback. One of the things which has been occurring to us is that notion of that motivation to learn stuff and actually having information in front of kids that actually drives their own desire to get better. So rather than it's an extrinsic thing that because I tell them to, it's an intrinsic thing because they can see where they are and how they want to improve. And Darren did show me a quick snapshot of the learning board, but I hear you use the word learning board, so tell us about it.
So, Darren, have you got the snap of that you can bring up?
Yeah, I can. Just give me a second, and I'll bring up a couple of snaps here. We'll start with that one, Janelle. So.
Yeah. So basically, what you're seeing here is a static report of a dynamic process. Now, that's not where we want to be. That's one of the small steps we're taking to get there. So what you're seeing there is as a whole school, from PK to 12, we've got 12 learning habits. 4 of those habits are work habits, so they get reported on at interim points, and you're either, handing in your assessments or you're not. You're either organised or you're not. So those sorts of just common work habits. We've got another 4 habits that we're calling cognitive skills, and that's things like critical and creative thinking, those sorts of skills.
Yep.
And we've developed, initially, we just had a scale that staff at the end of each semester, both teachers and students, would evaluate themselves on a general scale. So a working towards scale, if you like.
So with a rubric or?
Indicators rather than a rubric, and
okay,
and it was quite a generalised, big picture scale.
Yep.
And so we had 4 cognitive skills and then 4 dispositions, things like resiliency, resourcefulness, those sorts of things.
Yep.
So in that process, we've had learning habits on our reports for about 15 years now. We only had 4. There was a general feeling that we needed to expand that, so that gave us the impetus to expand it. Where we've moved now is to realising that those things are actually quite different things. So the dispositions are different things to skills. And so we've now, at an assessment level, if you like, got different scales. So one is very much a skills scale, a competency scale, if you like, and one is a more developmental scale. And then we've broken that up into performance areas for each of those things with some general indicators about what you might see at a junior school level or middle school level and a senior school level. The next part of that will be about unpacking that further from a discipline point of view. So we would see these sorts of things. So we want to look at observable behaviours so that we can tie that back to our impacts and say, well, our impacts are things like thinker, doer, self-activator, and so those 4 impacts then are aligned, if you like, with those learning habits in the realisation that to be a successful learner, you need to have these skills and dispositions over and above the academic skills and knowledge or understanding.
So where does your academic skills and stuff tie? Does it tie into this, or is it kind of a separate thing?
So,
and can I just add to that, coming from the audience as well, is that's exactly the question is, and so what about the Australian curriculum in this?
Yeah.
So
many of the cognitive skills and dispositions are in the general capabilities anyway.
Yep.
And then many of them are both academic skills that you would need, like critical thinking or creative thinking. Those words are in the Australian curriculum as well. So there's those links. In terms of pure academic knowledge, if you like, content knowledge. So the UBD process allows or forces you to think about understandings, knowledge, and skills. So we're still tracking those in the same way you would. And for 2016, we've got a dot and band for our academics, and so we will have that alongside of that. Where we're moving towards 2017, however, is a dynamic reporting system where we will track if you're UBD users, you'll see the word transfer. So we'll actually be quite explicit about the notion of transfer, and we'll track the notion of transfer through our assessment tasks. We will track then those cognitive skills. We will, what we call grafting those onto assessments, so that any assessment will have both the academic content and skills plus the cognitive skills grafted onto it automatically. So we're linking from our electronic unit planner to the learning board. That data will then be sucked automatically out in that process. So for instance, critical thinking, then we can map that right across the school in either co-curricular or curricular ways, because we're all using the same scale. And then a student can have a picture of themselves as a critical thinker with all of these bits of information and the evidence from where they collected that from.
And you're getting multiple feeds into that too, aren't you? So, like, different teachers are feeding in information. So in art, critical thinking looks in a particular way. In science, it looks a little bit different. But interesting.
Using the same scale because the elements of critical thinking are the same.
Yeah, cool.
And then the board, the students will be able to see that data on the board and be able to aggregate it. So they might look at it by subject. They might look at that element across subjects. They eventually will be able to drill down so they can see, well, here's a piece of evidence that shows that, so that eventually all of those assessment evidence will become part of that learning board as well.
So can I feed in a bit of an audience question here for you, Janelle? This sounds like a lot of work. I'm paraphrasing. How? I mean, you can obviously see the pushback to say, well, we're already grading, we're already doing those things today. You're talking about unit planning on top of how?
Yeah. So ours hasn't been on top of, so this has been, as I said, a kind of 10-year journey. So we're already using unit planner. So then the question was with the learning board was, how do we create the efficiencies between what they're already doing in unit planner to the learning board, and how can we create, so for instance you might have marking blanks that already have that because you've tagged those things in the unit planner, then it just spits out your marking blank, and as soon as you use that marking blank, that data automatically goes onto the learning board. So it's So we're creating those efficiencies in the system. We're doing a lot of work. My IT department are doing a lot of work. Edutect are doing a lot of work in the design stage, but it hasn't increased the work for teachers. It's made their work more efficient. One of the things we have taken away, however, is written comments. So that was taking us, per sub-school, about 6 days of teacher time a year. Now, I don't know about you, Mike, but I'd much prefer my teachers to be teaching rather than writing comments that had very little meaning for either students or parents. So one of the processes we went through was to take away that, but provide this richer picture of the student experience through the learning habits and the learning board.
Can I jump in?
Student-led conferences where the students would show evidence of those learning habits, so that we had processes where the students and parents were coming together with the information so that they could see the link between the learning habits and the success they were having in particular academic subjects.
Mike, you had a question for Janelle.
Yeah, it was probably more of a statement in terms of a slightly different, a perspective on it. For me, one of the things about UBD, which is great, is it challenges you to say what's really important. And it would seem to me at Janelle's school, they've actually sat down as a school community and said, look, these things are really important. And the minute you have buy-in on that, the minute you say your staff are saying, look, critical thinking is a really important 21st century skill, which is important for us, to value for our kids, then for me, I don't know, it's a question about work, because in the end, you're going to build assessments that are building those things in, and so simply as part of the assessment process, you are valuing, identifying and valuing that part of it. Right now,
although you can sell that to your early adopters, and you can sell that to people who get it, but there are still staff who want to have efficiencies. So I think you've got to think about the broad range of your staff. So I've got certain staff who sit on my shoulder because I'm a big picture thinker and I get excited about ideas and I can do all the research and I can, do the rah-rah. But I've got several teachers who sit on my shoulder and make me be realistic about that, and so I always need to make sure that the process systems are going to be efficient for them, and where can I save them time to do the real rather than the mechanical stuff. So for me, I'd much rather than be doing the viable curriculum, writing exciting curriculum, than I would be entering endless hours, entering and re-entering data in lots of different systems or whatever. So I look for ways that I can sell it from an efficiencies point of view as well, I guess.
Can I just direct this, and maybe this is something for both of you, and maybe Mike you could answer. Is some of the audience is saying, well, we're just trying to get UBD to stick, and I think it does off of what Janelle was just saying, that it would seem that the system has to support your end in mind, or drive, and there has to be some efficiencies. So maybe that's something, maybe even down at the UBD level, Mike, that you must have experienced.
Yeah, look, in the end, writing good curriculum takes time, and I think for us, we've been prepared to accept mediocre units as a stepping stone towards better ones. Right, and it's about kind of like, for us, I mean, I've got on my little notes here, I've been scribbling down, leadership is one of those critical things in this whole thing, right? And I think, for us, we've got support from the entire principal team in terms of saying, look, this is the direction that we're going to go, and we're going to keep going there. It's not something that we're going to, change up in a year's time when something better comes along. There's been a few times where other things have appeared on the horizon, and there's been a conscious decision for us to say, look, no, this is how we do it. So as people feel like there's value for their investment, right? Because it is an investment.
Yeah, but I think I'd agree with that. Yeah, I'd agree with that entirely, Mike. I think you're exactly right. There has to be a single focus. They can't be doing lots of other things that change. And I think you're signalling there, this is the most important work we do as teachers. We're going to give you the time and the resources to be able to do it. And to write good curriculum, it is hard, but as you've already seen over that 5 years, the process of thinking just becomes part of what they do, and so that each time you do the process, it becomes easier. And you're right, you have to acknowledge that. I think the other flexibility, though, of UBD is around where you start. So it does allow you to have different starting points in terms of, like, my maths faculty really focused on assessments, for instance, and that really drove things. And then, you know, there's different. You can have different starting points where you keep ramping up the expectations in the process, because once they do the process, they realise its benefit. So the process itself, once you're in it, gets people excited too, because they're excited about what those big ideas are and being explicit about that, and you get all those curriculum geeks together, you know, talking curriculum, and that's what fires people off as well. So you get some of your impetus and energy through the process itself.
Dan, if I can jump in on that, because one of the things I know when we talked with Jay was about, well, how do you find, you know, how do you create time to make some of these things happen? And one of the things that we've done here, and you know, we're just a bog standard government school. We haven't got huge budgets or anything like that. And for us, what we've done is we've really limited, or we've been strategic, I suppose, rather than limited in terms of external PD that we use, right? And so we've done a lot of our PD in-house, but by allowing faculty's time, release time, so we've had, like the last 4 years, we've had 2 full-day releases for each faculty group to actually sit and look at whole school initiatives around curriculum delivery and that sort of thing. So it's, you know, it's about having, I mean, the other part of it is people's performance cycles. You know, UBD is one of the critical elements in that, so it sits front and centre. So you say, look, one of the things that, you know, you're going to be assessed against, you know, for want of a better word, is actually your ability and how you've engaged with the UBD process. And part of that, we're going to provide you meeting time where that's actually going to be what you're working on. And then we're also going to provide you release time where you can sit with your colleagues and actually have some student-free mental space to actually think about what is it you're trying to achieve. And I think the last bit on that is being upfront, as Janelle's kind of alluding to say, like, you know, we don't expect it all to happen straight away. Right? We're going to take a long-term view here, but we want to see movement. We want to see some. We started with our faculty. I said, look, pick your worst unit, pick the thing that you're least happy with, and let's UBD that. Right? And once we've got that working, then we'll eventually work up to the one that you're most happy with that probably doesn't need much work, and we'll do that one last. Right? Now, again, I wouldn't say we're there with everything, but we're definitely on that pathway towards getting, you know, all those things. And I suppose the other part's worth checking there, Jay would again would say, and try and UBD everything. UBD the important stuff, right? And then work towards those things that are less important.
And out of those conversations grow the next steps too. Yeah. So, like the languages department have got a set of essential questions, because that goes across no matter where, you know, no matter what year level they're teaching languages. So they've got some fundamental understandings and things. So it's created power within those particular disciplines to really elevate the things that are most important for them. And it's given them, as Mike was saying, weeding of the Australian curriculum into what's most important, and forefronting that so that they don't get so hung up in having to cover things.
Yeah.
So thinking process. And Mike's right, you've got to give people time for that. So we don't have any kind of administrative meetings. That's all done electronically. We've bought staff days. We have staff days at the beginning and the end of year. That's our focus for them. We buy collaborative time, we collapse classes, we've completely changed our middle school timetabling so that all our core teachers have 12 periods off together and 12 on together, so you can get efficiencies in the way you think about timetabling. So there are a whole lot of those processes and efficiencies that I think you can get creative about how you do those things as well to value the work.
I'm just going to draw us a little bit to time here. We're about half that point where we usually take some audience questions in this, and we've got a couple queued up. So, I'm just going to make one comment because I'm going to get you to come to some closing remarks soon. But it just seems to me, I just pulled up a slide where a comment I often have is really about, it seems to me those successful schools have leadership, professional development, and smart tools kind of all combined together. That's to be but we'll come back to that in a second because there's a couple of really interesting audience questions, so I'm going to try and tie them together thematically. I will ask you for some closing comments shortly before we close the webinar, but this is one that's come out and I'm going to make this for both of you because I don't think it's necessarily specific to Learning Board. The question is how, Janelle, I guess it was directed to you, Janelle, which is how have the teachers responded to the Learning Board in that are they embracing it, or are they just back to their old processes? Have we put in some new systems, I guess, and how is that practically done? We can extend this to you as well, Mike, if you think about this. Is this the same with the systems? Have we put these things in and nothing really has changed, or is it really happening?
So we first of all had another product called a dashboard that failed dismally. So we learnt a lot from that. And we learnt, and that was basically a student management system. So we haven't broached for several years the notion of a dashboard. We have a portal and virtual classrooms and things like that, but we haven't broached the dashboard. So for a start, we couldn't mention the word dashboard, hence a new term, and we even at a leadership level and at an academic committee level have had lots of rude conversations about what we would recall something. And so in that process, we've really had to re-image what it does and what it is and the processes for use, which is why we've come through it being a student use and tied to evidence of impacts, and the notion that it will be an aggregation and re-aggregation of data to allow better feedback. So for us it came through, as you were talking about, Mike, wanting better avenues for feedback, realising that how we were giving feedback wasn't what we wanted. And so then we looked at electronic tools for ways that we could give feedback and look at data. And so we had to change, I guess, the purpose of what this learning board was going to do for us and look for products that were going to be, and companies that were going to be able to build that for us. So,
I'll just throw over the top of that. One of the things which is nice about smart tools is that you do get an ability to look over people and over people's shoulders. Now, not that I'm into the big brother kind of thing, but there is a point where I know for years in terms of curriculum change, people would go, yeah, I'm doing that, and then go after class and completely ignore whatever they'd agreed to. Whereas you can actually see, with UBD tool, I can look at people's units, and I can, within my curriculum team, I know when there's issues with how people have engaged with the process, we can actually go and say, look, we had a look at your unit, we think we probably need to sit down and help you out because, clearly there's some issues there. So the smart tools part of it, whether it's Learning Board, UBD, part of that engagement is that you can actually see how people are engaging. You can actually draw evidence out. The other part too is that whole notion of you've got to change practice before you'll change belief, right? And once people start using these things, then they'll actually come aboard with you, and you can actually then convince them that's a good idea. I think we try and convince them first, but then you're always going to have a problem until they've actually used it and seen. So I would be hopeful that you'd see, I know here, if I was seeing a learning board like that, for example, we've used an online reporting system for the first time this year that's readily accessible to students. And without us having to do anything, all of these teachers started pulling reports up for kids in front of them and saying, okay, what is your report telling you? What do you need to do about it? Right? And that was teachers simply going, hey, I've got this new thing that I can use here. I've got access to data. I'm now going to use it to help drive learning forward in my classrooms.
Yeah. That's great from both of you. Now, we're coming close to the end of our time here. So I want you both, if you could, come up with a sort of closing remark if we can tie it back to our theme here, which is, it sounds like there's a lot of things both of you are doing for Bright Futures. So Janelle, I'm going to pose the question this way, for people that are sitting in the audience in terms of what they should take away and where you would like to see them or help them in doing some of the things that you've done, what would be your recommendations? What would be your or a closing comment, if you will?
I think be really clear about what it is you want to do. So be really clear about what your end point is that you're aiming for, and be able to articulate that, and then look for the best vehicles and the research around it, so that you're really clear about that, and you know what's out there and what's best in that field. And then there's the whole, who are going to be your early adopters and who you're going to need to take along with you, and all that kind of strategic, I guess, thinking about that. And make sure it comes from a need. What's your need? And therefore, what's the best way to meet that need?
Before I jump to Mike, so just queue up, because I'm going to do it. From what I hear you saying, Janelle, I'm going to do a shameless plug for Jay McTighe and Greg Curtis's book about leading modern learning, because I think, if it's okay, Janelle, and paraphrase you, a lot of what you've been talking about is in that book, and I think it's pretty well articulated, starting with the end in mind. So I'm a huge fan of it, and obviously we're pleased that the Learning Board, some of the things you're talking about, I think are evidenced in the culminating chapters of that, and they really do just jump on that. So I just wanted to use that shameless plug for Jay and Greg's book, because I do think it's great. It's a great book.
We wouldn't have run this journey without that, and they're the sort of thought leaders that we used in terms of the journey, because that was the best research in terms of where we were going and what we needed at particular times.
Over to you, Mike. So closing time for our audience.
I suppose it's interesting because, you kind of went for the first bit, and I was merely scribbling my own notes down here, and mine was all about leadership and bright futures. So I think we go together really nicely. For me, there's like that theme of bright futures, and I love that starting with a slide of one of your children, because in the end, that's what this is about. This is about these precious people that are, sometimes not so precious to us because they annoy us, but they're precious to someone.
Precious.
But it's that notion of it's that responsibility we have as leaders of education to actually be looking to what we can do to make a difference in kids' lives, because ultimately the things, the work is hard, right? And that's, for everybody who's listening, the work is hard. It's not a secret, right? But it's good work, right? And the things that we can do with it and the differences we can make in kids' lives are really important. So I suppose I would say that leadership is one of those critical things. Leadership is the thing which is going to allow any of these sorts of changes to take hold. Now, the tools and all those things, they're fantastic and they're great supports, but the leadership is the critical bit that you need. And that leadership flows down. It's about your leadership within your teaching, allowing your early adopters to run on, but also supporting them. And in some respects, for us, part of our journey, there's a while there where it wasn't okay for us to make mistakes, right? And once we have permission, it's okay if this doesn't work. As long as we're working towards this noble purpose, and we can have a few, where we go down a wrong path here, or where something doesn't quite work the way we wanted it, and a reset and a re-go. As long as we're working towards that goal, I think it's okay, and that's that permission that you need as a leader of change to actually have a go. So I suppose my sum up is, it's all about, the ultimate goal is about the kids that we're working with day to day, and all of those other things are fantastic for supporting our teachers to make a difference in kids' lives.
Wow, fantastic summary, Mike. You did far better than I think I'm ever even going to try to attempt to. So I just need to wrap up the evening, put that together. Yes, I think he deserves a clap there. Thank you. As I'm wrapping up the evening, I have to thank you both for, first off, taking up the time. There's a lot of questions here that we'll get to in a second, but thank you very much, Mike, first off, for taking the time, and Janelle, just absolutely brilliant to have you here. These are great stories. And I also want to thank everyone else in the audience. I know there's a lot of things that I've paraphrased and maybe not done perfectly. But if you would like to know any more about what we've talked about in the webinar today, I've left some contact details on the screen. You would have had some contact details to get to the webinar today. And for those of you that will join us in our next webinar, which is part of our personalized learning series with Alison Zamuda and Kate Bean, that webinar is scheduled for the 18th of December, and it's going to focus on culture in personalized learning. So once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Very indebted to you, Janelle and Mike. Thanks very much. And I look forward to seeing all of you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Bye.
See ya.